Agios otios, agios ischigus, agios thanatos, eleison immas. Agios otios, agios ischigus, agios thanatos, eleison immas. Agios oteos, agios ischiros, agios thanatos, eleison immas. Guard the deposit, says the Apostle to Timothy. The deposit has been considered essential in the Eastern Bloc, and it has also been considered essential in our own Western sphere up until recently in every respect. It is the problem that we are somewhat influenced by the independence of thought that is in the West. For instance, from the osmosis that takes place between Catholics and Protestants because they're so near to us, but also because of the ambit in which we live. There is this independence of thought. It can be seen in some cultures more than others. Some free-thinking countries, for instance, like Germany or Holland or some parts of France, would be more inclined to something of their own making than perhaps others. But the problem is endemic. We forget where we have come from. In the East, partly because of the fact that the episcopacy is very monastic in style, all the bishops in practice are from the monastic world because they have to be more or less, because they're the only ones ordainable for the episcopacy. They are the ones who are formed, therefore, in the celibate monastic vertical life, a life grounded precisely in the deposit. For there it is not just theology but also spirituality which forms them. And therefore the notion of being able to tamper and tinker with the deposit at will is alien to them. So coming from the top, there is this barrage against what might be endemic in the West. They will not let this come in. Now, in the West, as Ratzinger pointed out, the so-called spirit of the council was used to justify what had nothing to do with the council. It led to this free thinking within, Catholicism, and a form of Neo-Protestantism which actually would not be acceptable even among certain Protestants who on certain elements would be more conservative than we would. One has to notice, for instance, how out of force of habit certain things carry on in at least certain Protestant spheres which are easily jettisoned in Catholic ones. For instance, that element of dignity and otherness in the language used in the pulpit and in approaching God in prayer, in the way that one dresses and therefore has a bearing. It is all part of something which replaces the externals that we have, but replaces them actually with a certain force and security, because there is an ethos. Now, we have a tendency to think that we can have a complete continuity between the profane and the sacred, to bring down always the level of the otherness to that of the average and normal, so that actually in church and in our rapport with God we have more of the day-to-day, workaday adorings. Well, it's not quite so simple. Guard the deposit implies also not just the faith, but some, at least, of the elements that have protected it in its expression. God is God, man is man, And we have to remember that there is a slight difference. Also, what pertains to God in the realm of man, the priesthood, the consecrated life, is God's. And to bring that so close to the banal and the average, the profane and the workaday, is a false form of evangelizing at any cost. One has to also command respect, and to start swearing and wearing anything at all and behaving in any way whatsoever in the interests of getting through to the people out there is an illusion. We have nothing more to offer. A close friend, until he died, was Archimandrite Barnabas. He was a Welsh-speaking priest and monk, and indeed hermit by the end, who had both of the East and the West. He was a cultured man, and he had a notion of what was tradition, and he informed me on many levels. He explained the difference between the authority element, which was Exousia, and that of charism. He also explained the importance of what they had received, Paradosis. Now, in Protestantism, charism is important, but they haven't got the Exousia. That is received from the apostolic succession. The ideal is to combine charism with the authority, Dynamis, power, with also its secure moorings and setting. Otherwise, one gets into a personal cult. A man, a woman who has a gift, and on we go after that figure. But there are, and there always have been, within the traditions that we have, people who have genuine charisms, but contained. And that is invited by, actually, the Holy Spirit himself. In the council documents, we have this invitation to bishops to discern and to pick up what the Spirit is doing, not to quash. Because many bishops spend their time as bishops fielding very well all the graces that might be coming at them from the Holy Spirit. It's actually quite ironic, but they don't take any risk, and therefore they get no newness and no innovation. It happens, whereas some other bishops easily, or at least more easily, encourage rather than discourage, and as a result get new things and new power. Qui ne risque rien n'a rien, says the old French saying. He who risks nothing gains nothing. And we know in Toulon, the bishop there has no less than 50 new foundations, because he tends to say yes. In fact, I was talking here to the bishop the other day of this diocese, and he is very open to what the Spirit prompts. In fact, he just, in a few words, replied, it's the principle of Gamaliel. In other words, what was said with regard to this new way, the Christian way. Gamaliel, the Pharisee, was saying to his fellow Pharisees, if it be from God, and so on, but if it be from man, it will fall of its own. So one lets the result come or go, and then one discerns, without actually preempting the result by not allowing anything to happen. But that is contained within authority, therefore the charism coming within the structure of protection. Now, we are living in a time when there was a floraison, a burgeoning of new charisms, new gifts to the Church in the wake of the Second Vatican Council, because it was a potential springtime. But the problem was precisely that then, because of what was in the air, it became a neo-Protestantism in some cases where things get out of hand and out of continuity. It is interesting to see how in France, the charismatic renewal, especially in places like Les Béatitudes, these new communities that came out of it in the 70s and 80s, was contained by bishops. They were working very much alongside bishops, and they were orthodox, and they had renewed traditional practices, adoration, the rosary, much beautiful liturgy, and so on. It was anchored because in France, not being a Protestant country, they didn't have Big Brother watching American Protestantism, Pentecostalism and the like. It was Catholic based and therefore allowed to grow within its natural context. The same to some extent in Italy. Whereas in English-speaking countries there is sometimes an element of influence from American Pentecostalism coming into renewed Catholicism, which doesn't exactly help because we then get into ecumenical language which excludes specifically Catholic language. It's actually ambiguous to start jettisoning things like Our Blessed Lady in the interest of being hospitable to our brethren in a prayer group. It has to be Catholic if it has to have the full blessing of heaven. Now, the deposit is 2,000 years old. And in the same interest of being with it and being influenced by other things in the air, we tend to approach this otherness of the ancient bimillennial history that we have in a mode which is quite out of continuity. What Benedict XVI would have referred to as organic growth, it's being lost. Because liturgy and prayer have roots and grow spontaneously within a context. Take them out of their context and we have an explosion and a discontinuity, revolution and not renewal. So in that sense, to interpret precisely what the Lord is wanting to do in our time, one needs to breathe the history of where we're coming from. One needs to be aware of all the weight of the deposit over which one has no power. It is bigger than ourselves and we have to apply for it before future history. To conclude, this man was very worried when he saw in the 70s and 80s what was happening in the West, where he was living as an Orthodox monk and priest. He could see what we were perhaps less able to see. The problem is this: if we want the blessing of God, God must reign in his sphere. If we want to be the centre of attention, then we will reap the consequences. God will not send us what we want. Our churches will gradually find that blessings are going elsewhere. The vocations will not come. If, on the other hand, we keep on to what we are meant to do in the will of God, in genuine authenticity of worship, without being in any way visible, then God will reign and will bless. And we see the fruits. Churches, communities, where God is genuinely adored without man being centre stage, grow and become blessed and central to spirituality, where God is God, and man is fed by God, and not telling God what he should or should not do.